محمد أشرف الأعراب والعجم محمد خير من يمشي على قدم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم.
Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum to Muslim brothers and sisters and of course our Christian friends. Before we commence, we will begin with a passage from the Qur'an by our learned Qari. That's where he quotes passages and extracts from the Qur'an, and I'll subsequently give you a translation.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن إبراهيم كان أمة قانتا لله حنيفا ولم يك من المشركين شاكرا لأنعمه اجتباه وهداه إلى صراط مستقيم وآتيناه في الدنيا حسنة وإنه في الآخرة لمن الصالحين ثم أوحينا إليك أن اتبع ملة إبراهيم حنيفا وما كان من المشركين إنما جعل السبت على الذين اختلفوا فيه وإن ربك ليحكم بينهم يوم القيامة فيما كانوا فيه يختلفون ادع إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن إن ربك هو أعلم بمن ضل عن سبيله وهو أعلم بالمهتدين وإن عاقبتم فعاقبوا بمثل ما عوقبتم به ولئن صبرتم لهو خير الصابرين واصبر وما صبرك إلا بالله ولا تحزن عليهم ولا تك في ضيق مما يمكرون إن الله مع الذين اتقوا والذين هم محسنون صدق الله العظيم.
That was Maulana Naeem Jibai with the recitation from the Quran. The passage he chose was Surah 16 from verse 120 onwards. And for the benefit of those in the audience who are not Muslim, this is a translation. It says, Abraham was indeed a model, devoutly obedient to Allah, that's God, and true in faith, and he joined not gods with God. He showed his gratitude for the favors of God who chose him and guided him to a straight way. And we gave him good in this world, and he will be in the hereafter in the ranks of the righteous. So we taught thee the inspired message. Follow the ways of Abraham, the true in faith, and he joined not gods with God. The Sabbath was only made strict for those who disagreed as to its observance, but God will judge between them on the day of judgment as to their differences. Invite all to the way of thy Lord with wisdom and with beautiful preaching, and reason with them in the ways that are best and most gracious. For thy Lord knows best who have strayed from his path and who receives guidance. And you catch them out, then catch them out no worse than they catch you out. But if you show patience, that is indeed the best cause for those who are patient. And do thou be patient, for thy patience is but from God. Nor grieve over them, and distress not thyself because of their plots. For God is with those who restrain themselves and those who do good. That was from Surah 16, verse 125, from verse 120 onwards. Shabir Ally hails from Toronto, Canada. He's an imam. He's presently the director of the International Islamic Information and Dawah Center International in Toronto. He has, over the years, engaged in a number of debates with leading individuals, leading debaters, in a number of topics. He presently has a Bachelor of Arts degree in Religious Studies with a particular emphasis in the Old and the New Testament, Masters in Religious Studies, also at the University of Toronto with a specialization in Quranic exegesis, and presently he's engaged in his PhD in Quranic exegesis, unpacking the Quran, understanding it, engaging in what we would call tafsir or commentary, understanding the Quran. And the topic selected for this evening is the relationship between Islam, Christianity and Judaism. It's indicative, and I might just point this out to you, that if you have to look at the Shema, which is a creed, in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6, verse 4, and for those of you who are familiar with Hebrew, you'd forgive my horrible pronunciation, but something like this: Shema Israelu Adonai Ilaheinu Adonai Echad, which means, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Some 600 years later, you find Jesus in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 12, verse 27, coming with the same. A scribe comes up to him and asks him what the first of all commandments is, and he says, Shema Israelu Adonai Ilaheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. 600 years later, a Christian deputation from Najran come to the Prophet Muhammad, and they question him. They spend 3 days in the mosque, and over time they ask him what is his concept of God, and he's made to say or proclaim, Qul huwallahu ahad. Now I'm not going to amplify that, but if you look at the linguistically, the similarities between Ikhad and Ahad, referring to God being one and only, and you'd basically begin to identify the similarities between the messages and the teachings of these great personalities and these prophets of God. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Shabir Ally, who will address us.
I begin by praising our Creator and Fashioner, asking him to send peace and blessings upon all of his prophets and messengers, especially the last of all of them, after whose name Muslims generally say Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, which means peace and blessings of God be upon him. The relationship between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. My brother Yusuf has already intimated some of the connections between the three faiths. But let me try to trace the historical unfolding of these faiths to give you a broader perspective on how things fit together. Around 1250 BC, Moses crosses the Red Sea with the people of Israel. Some of you may have seen the movie The Ten Commandments. That is a story of Moses and his receiving the tablets with God's commandments, and then eventually his crossing the Red Sea, the most dramatic moment in that film. So what is that all about? And how does Moses relate to not only Judaism but also Christianity and Islam? Well, to begin with, why were the Israelites crossing the Red Sea in the first place? Where did they come from? How did they get there? And why did they want to go to the other side? Well, to understand that, we have to go back a little further in history to about 1800 BC, and we encounter an old man, or well, at least that's how we know him, a man by the name of Abraham. His name was mentioned in the Quranic recitation that we heard earlier at the start of this program. The Quran describes him as an ummah, as a special person. The word ummah usually means community, and it can also refer to one person as a way of marking off that individual as being of real special importance. Abraham is regarded as the father of monotheism. He is dear to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So a good starting point will be to think of Abraham. But even further still, if we go even way back, now I'm reminding the tape of history all the way back to the beginning, we have in the book of Genesis in the Bible, the story of the creation of human beings, the creation of the world to begin with, and the creation of Adam. In the Quran, human beings are addressed as the children of Adam. So we have the sense that all human beings are one large family. The story of the creation of Adam is told in the book of Genesis in chapter 1 and again in chapter 2. What is the book of Genesis? The book of Genesis is one of some 66 individual books that make up the Christian Bible, the Protestant Christian Bible, or 73 in the Catholic version. The Bible is divided into two major sections. The first section is the Old Testament, and the Old Testament is roughly the Jewish scriptures as well. So Christians share with Jews that portion which Christians refer to as the Old Testament. The first part of the Old Testament is the book of Genesis, and that's where we have the story of the creation. Now that story of the creation then is common to Jews and also to Christians, because both faiths hold dear that section of the Christian Bible. But Muslims also understand the creation story along similar lines, because the story is told again in the Quran, not in such great detail, but in brief. It's mentioned again and again to draw our attention to our humble beginnings. So if we start there, then we can see that all human beings are one large family, and of course then we can go later on back to Abraham and see how the faiths unfold. God, according to the book of Genesis, makes a covenant with Abraham. Covenant meaning an agreement. Abraham is to fulfill certain commandments, and God will be with him. One of the most important marks of the commandment between Abraham and God will be that Abraham will circumcise himself and all of his his male descendants, and beginning with all those who were there present in his household. So he circumcised his son Ishmael, who was probably about 13 years old at the time. And he circumcised himself. He was about 86 years old, and all of his male servants and so on. So that was a covenant. That was an agreement, and the sign of the agreement would be the circumcision that would be passed on for generations forever, without end. Abraham, according to the book of Genesis, was shown a certain tract of land. He was originally from Ur, from where he traveled up the Euphrates River, and settled at Haran, but not for too long. Eventually God tells him to come down into the land of Canaan, and this is what he does. But eventually things would not bode well for people in the land of Canaan. There will be some shortage of food, and the Israelites, the descendants of Abraham from one branch, now known as the Israelites, will find themselves going to look for food in Egypt. Eventually they settle there under, starting with the rulership of Joseph, who is known to be a prophet of God. And it is from there that they will now have to make the exodus, eventually under Moses. Under Joseph, the Israelites did well. Joseph had invited his father and his brothers to go and live in Egypt. And so Israelites began to flourish in Egypt. But sometime after Joseph, the ruling monarchs of Egypt began to ill-treat the Israelites, and even to suppress them, such that so that the Israelites will not be able to take over the rulership of Egypt. They were given hard labor. Their male offspring were being killed off. And the Quran makes reference to this. يُذَبِّحُونَ أَبْنَاءَكُمْ. They were slaughtering your boys. So the Israelites were being oppressed. And Moses then was sent as a deliverer of the Israelite people. Sent with a message to the Pharaoh that the Pharaoh is to let the people go. And when the Pharaoh resisted, God sent one plague after another to persuade him that he should finally listen to the command of God and let the people go. Eventually he relents, but not for long. As the people are fleeing, he begins to pursue them. They cross the Red Sea in safety, but the Pharaoh is drowned therein. The story of the Pharaoh is told in the Qur'an as well. For example, in Surah 10, verse number 92, the end of the Pharaoh is being depicted there, where God says to him, فَالْيَوْمَ نَنَجِّيكَ بِبَدَنِكَ لِتَكُونَ لِمَنْ خَلْفَكَ آيَةً. This day we save you in your body, that you may be a sign for those who come later. Indeed, the Pharaoh is a sign for those who come later, in that we can reflect back at the fact that this man was so great in his time, great in terms of all material measures, and at the same time he was brought low in the eyes of God. So what makes a person great is not the material possessions and trappings that one has, but the spiritual connection that one has with God. So Moses crosses with the children of Israel, and they go and set up their dynasty in the land of Canaan. Moses does not live to enter the land, but he sees it from a distance. It would be in the reign of the King David that the Jewish people find the golden era in their history. David is regarded by Muslims to be a prophet of God. So you see the connections between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The persons that we are speaking about here, whether Moses or Abraham or David, they are all important persons in the three faiths. Soon after David, the kingdom is divided between north and south, and the Israelites will eventually be attacked by one invading group after another, the Babylonians and the Persians, and eventually the Romans, until finally the Israelites are visited by another prophet. Muslims regard Jesus, on whom be peace, to be a prophet, a messenger of God. The Israelites were apparently expecting a Messiah, a deliverer, someone who would follow in the footsteps of David, who would even be a descendant of David, who will come and rule in the place of David. So if in David's time they experienced the golden age, now they want the son of David to rule and to bring back that golden era. That was one expectation. But there was also an expectation that there will be a prophet, and that prophet could also be called Messiah. There was an expectation there will be a priestly individual as well, and that too could be called Messiah. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in 1947, give evidence to these beliefs that were prevalent among the Israelites in the time of Jesus. The New Testament Gospels came to be written after Jesus and about Jesus. And they emphasize that Jesus was all of these things. He's the priest, he's the prophet, and he is also the messianic son of David. So all of the prophecies seem to have culminated with Jesus. But today, if one reads carefully the ancient scriptures, one will find that there are indications of yet another figure apart from Jesus. And Muslims believe that the Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace, was the fulfillment of that person who was promised. In the book of Genesis, we've already encountered the fact that Abraham was made to circumcise himself and his descendants. We mentioned the name Ishmael. Ishmael was Abraham's firstborn son. And God had promised Abraham that his descendants would be numerous as the stars. Naturally, when God promises a man of faith that he will have many children, this promise must entail that his children will be righteous, or at least will have some guidance from God. It will be of no avail to promise a righteous person that he's going to have children, and then the children that are the result of this promise will be disobedient to God, will turn away from the religion. How many a Christian parent or a Jewish parent or a Muslim parent agonizes at night because their children are not following in the faith? So naturally, if God says to one such parent, I'm going to give you a child, you expect that the child is going to be a righteous one. Otherwise, what's the use of such a promise? So when God promised Abraham that his descendants would be numerous, it is to be expected that they will include those who follow God's guidance. But it is important to notice that God also made the same promise to Ishmael. God promised Ishmael that he too will have many descendants. So then, where was the spiritual legacy that would be manifested through the descendants of Ishmael? The stone edition of the Chumash, a Jewish commentary on the Torah, makes mention of this promise and says that this promise was actually fulfilled with the rise of Islam. Now that's an interesting comment because it is found in a Jewish commentary on the Torah, the Chumash, stone edition of the Chumash, commenting on Genesis chapter 17, verse 20. Now, at any time, we may hear the call to prayer. So I think this is a fitting moment for me to take a break. And when we come back after the call to the prayer, I will have a few things to say about this prophecy and how it unfolded and became obvious in the life of the Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace. And we'll have a chance later on to look also at the New Testament and what it might indicate about the coming of the Prophet Muhammad, so that we tie in together Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as three sister religions. Assalamu alaikum.
What is the Injil? Do we have any books of the Injil? Because the New Testament as it is written after Jesus' death.
Question is, when the Quran refers to the Injil, what specifically is that referring to, and do we have any copies of that? Well, Injil might be translated roughly as gospel. It comes from the Greek euangelion, which means something like good news. There are four gospels in the New Testament of the Christian Bible. And Mark's gospel in particular begins by saying the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So Mark is obviously using the gospel here not as a genre for his own book, as a genre within which his own book fits, but good news almost seems to be the story about Jesus here. In a more general sense, Christians use the term gospel to mean good news, that Jesus came and preached good news, in the sense that there is an idea that God saves you, or God rescues you, or Jesus dies for your sins. So this is somehow good news. But later on, in Christian history, the writings themselves that seem to contain this good news, or the writings of the stories about Jesus, including the Gospel of Mark, come to be called Gospels. So now we have four Gospels. The Quran, however, is referring to gospel in the singular, as if there is only one. Moreover, the Quran in Surah 3 says about Jesus, وَيُعَلِّمُهُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَالتَّوْرَاةَ وَالْإِنْجِيلَ. God will teach him the book and the